We got started, set the clock back, 1984. Sean was in 4th grade. His teacher called me up and said, "Mr. Hawkins, we got a problem with your son." I said, "What'd he do now?" And he says, oh, nothing wrong. He didn't do anything bad. He said, "Just come on in and talk to me." And I went in and he says, "Well, I caught him doing something kind of unusual in class the other day." I said, "What'd he do now?" And he said, "Oh, nothing bad, but he was doing his work upside down, left-handed. I think he might be bored." And he says, "That just scares me." He says, "That's the easiest way to lose our really brightest kids is through boredom." He says, "But I've got an idea." He says, "Could you buy him a computer?" I says, "Yeah, I think so. I'm kind of interested in that myself." And he says, "Good. Here's a book. Don't buy any software." It was a programming book. So we went out to Radio Shack, bought him a computer, took it home, and I was putting it together. And you know, a lot of people ask me, how did you learn all these things that you know? And I said, well, you know, just start from the beginning. And that's what we were doing, starting from the beginning. I took that computer home, I was putting it together, and thought I had it all together, and flipped on the switch. Nothing. Now maybe it takes a little while for things to warm up in there, you know, so still nothing. And I'm going like, somebody told me not to buy that Radio Shack junk. You know, it's a little Tandy 1000. And so I've got the boxes back out, and I'm going to start putting it back in the boxes and take it back to them and tell them it doesn't work. And my daughter says, "Daddy, you might want to plug it in." Well, that was the start of Sean and I's experience of learning how to program. I teasingly say to people that my son and I grew up together, and because we kind of did. We learned programming together. He'd come home from school and he would program, and I remember the first program that he wrote was a little hangman program. And then I'd come home and he'd go to bed, and for a while we'd work together, and he'd show me what he learned, and then I would learn something, and we bought books and more books and more books, and at one point then his mom wanted a recipe program, and so we built her recipe program. And then and we never used the stuff. I mean, it was just like the game. I think we played the hangman game probably 4 or 5 times. Okay, now let's build something new. Because it was the building of things that was fun for us. And then we built a recipe program, built her a check register. I think there was a little spreadsheet of something. Anyway, a number of different things. We're always looking for projects to build. We built something even for the well drilling thing that we started on that when I was a welder. Back in those days, I was a well driller in a different life. So then we moved to Portland here, and I went to work for Dave, who you met this morning, Dave Olson. Was one of my best friends growing up, and I was a warehouse manager for their company, and they were a company that imported cheese from all over the world. And we had a 20,000 square foot cooler, 6 pallets high, that would fill with cheese. And we would bring in 20 pallets of brie at a time. You know what brie is? Real soft ripened cheese. Okay. Back in those days, it still was unpasteurized, so it was a very, very short shelf life. Every once in a while, one of those pallets would get used in the proper order, and it would go bad. And when brie goes bad, it really reeks and stinks, and it's very expensive. So this huge pallet of brie gone. And so I went home, and I said, "John, I have another project we can do." And I told him what we could do, and he said, "Oh yeah, Dad, and we can do this and this." He had all kinds of ideas for it. Well, he wrote over half of that program. I was working really long hours, and so he wrote over half of that program, and I took it to Dave's partner, Mark, and he was so excited. He says, "Paul, we had just gone out to get a quote to have this software written, and it was too much money. We couldn't do it, not in the budget. But," he says, actually, what you guys have done is actually more than what we were going to have done. And then he had some other ideas of some things that he wanted. And so we did those, and he gave us a sizable check for that. And I remember taking that home to Sean, who was now in 7th grade. And I remember his eyes got great big. He never seen nothing like that before. Dad, someday you and I are going to have our own business. We're going to be partners in our own company, and we're going to call it HawkSoft. And so, you know, and I always tell people, now we're living the American dream. How did we get into the insurance part? Well, right after that, after working so many long hours, I got tired of that, and I became an insurance agent. And we wrote some more software. I think the thing that we called, what did we call that, Sean? PC something.
PC Client.
PC Client, yeah. And that was kind of a sales process thing. And then I spent 3 years there, and then went to work for the guy that's now our sales manager, Bob Bloom. He had a large agency in Portland, large non-standard auto agency, and it was all paper files. They didn't have any automation. He hired me because he needed somebody that knew the technology, and that we could help him, somebody that could help him go to the next step, because he was very, very on the cutting edge of things. And so I decided, we wrote meanwhile, Sean was working in downtown Portland, or down in McAdam Avenue, on a summer job for a guy that was working with laser printers, and they wanted to print out forms. And so he had built a language, Form CC we called it, that would actually print an application, a form, and lay the data over the top of it for all at the same time. Now that's old hat. That was brand spanking new back then. And as soon as his boss wanted to use hardware to do all that, Sean said, we don't need the hardware. We can do this all with software. And the guy said, oh, that's it then. If we can do that with software, I'm not going to do it, because he was a hardware kind of guy. And but he says, yeah, but my dad said that we can really use this in the insurance business, that this is really a big deal. And he said, well, you and your dad go do it then, because it's yours. You developed the language. And so we started working on that. And our first product that we had was, first thing I wrote for the agency was called an app writer. And it would take all the different applications from all the different companies that we did, and we'd build that into an application that could then be printed out on a laser printer with the data flooding right over the top of it. Well, we had a guy, president of an insurance company in Seattle, Harold Anderson, come down to our office, and he said, talk to Bob, and he says, Bob, he says, we're getting these applications from you guys. He says, they're not our application. Well, they're just like our application. They're actually better than our application. And they're all filled out. None of it's handwritten, because back in those days we used to handwrite all the apps. And he says, it's always complete. He says, how are you guys doing this? This is amazing. And so Bob introduced me to Harold, and Harold said, Paul, he says, this is an amazing product. He says, I want to introduce you to a bunch of our agents in our next meeting in 2 weeks, because they need this product. And in that meeting, he introduced me to those agents, and in that meeting, we got our first 3 customers. Meanwhile, just right about that same time, Jason here married my daughter. And I said, Jason, I think we've got something we can sell. And he'd been helping me work on some of the forms, building forms. Him and my daughter both did when Jason was going to BYU. And he says, yeah, let's do that. And so there we were. We started a business and had our first 3 customers. And that was, as last month, that was 18 years ago. And so here we are now. Then we started building the management system as I saw the need in our agency, and then that has grown, and our customers, the custom operator customers wanted that too, and so now that's 18 years ago, and here we are. Just started with 3 of us, and now there's, I think there's what, 57?
52.
Or 52? Something like that. 50. It's 50-some employees now. And I want to welcome you guys to HawkSoft, and one of the things that Bob Bloom, when I was first starting our business, and in fact I would work part-time for him, I was working part-time for him, and then work in our business, and he said, Paul, the most important thing you're going to do is surround yourself with good people. That's the one thing that I can kind of take credit for here, is that I can say that we've surrounded ourselves with good people.